Hopefully just another minute, everyone. I've had a hard time connecting to YouTube. Oh,
Are we ready to go, Leanne?
almost. I'm sorry, it's having a hard time connecting.
It shows we're live on the Zoom meeting here.
Yeah, I'm not getting a picture though. Oh, let's go ahead and get going because this will record the audio and video anyway, and I can share that with folks if I need to.
Great. So Dale Keller, Engineering Manager here at the RTC. So we'll do a call to order for the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County Regional Road Impact Fee Technical Advisory Committee today on Thursday, September 24th, 2020. It is on my watch 8:36. And as Leanne mentioned, this meeting is being streamed live through the RTC YouTube channel and being recorded. So Leanne, I'll turn over to you for a roll call.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Alex Velto, and am I saying that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect, and welcome. This is your first meeting. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Amy Cummings. Brian Stewart.
Here.
David Blako.
Here.
Dwayne Smith. Jim Rundle. John Flansburgh. John Kripotic. John Martini. John Erickson.
Present.
Greg Knutson. Kurt Dietrich. Larry Chesney.
Here.
Mike Michaud.
Here.
Mitch Pink.
Here.
Peter Gower. Randy Walter. Chad Erkin.
Here.
And it looks like I also have Adam Spear from the RTC.
Present.
Amber Bowsmith from the RTC. Dale Keller from the RTC.
Here.
And Dunges from the RTC. Hannah Yu from the RTC.
Here.
Yelena Williams from the RTC. Leanne Olivas here from the RTC. Schwinn Wang from the RTC.
Here.
Claudia Hansen.
Here.
Jeremy Smith.
Here.
And it looks like Jim's iPhone joined us. Jim, is that Jim Rundle?
Yeah, Jim Rundle.
Perfect. Did I miss anyone? Okay, great. Well, we do have a quorum. Go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Leanne. Let's move to agenda item number 1, approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Motion.
Motion by John and a second.
Brian Stewart.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 2, public comment. Leanne, did we receive any public?
Dale, I'm sorry. Can we go back?
Sure.
So any opposed? Okay.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, public comment. Leanne, did we receive any public comment?
We did not.
Great. Moving on to agenda item number 3, approval of the August 27th, 2020 meeting minutes. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Do we have a second?
Brian Stewart, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm
I
not-
abstain.
Who was that? I'm sorry, that abstained.
David Blako, I was absent at that meeting.
Thank you, David.
Larry Chesney has to abstain also. I did not make that meeting.
Ted Ercon as well, didn't make the meeting.
Alex Velto as well have to abstain.
I'm sorry, I had David Blako, Alex Belto, and I missed someone in between.
It was Ted Ercon.
Thank you, Ted.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Let's move on to agenda item number 4, a presentation from TMRPA on their development model. At this time, I'd like to turn over to Jeremy Smith.
Jeremy, would you
Hey,
like to?
Good morning. We're actually hoping to start with Xuan Wang to talk about the RTC side of the model, and then she's going to turn it over to me if that's acceptable to you guys.
So is there any concern about, I guess, let's hear agenda item number 5 then regarding the RTP and the travel demand model. Is there any concerns from the committee to hear that agenda item first?
Nope.
Okay. So Xuan, let's jump to agenda item number 5 for the regional transportation plan and the development or travel demand model methodology presentation from Xuan Wang with RTC.
All right. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Xuan Wang. I'm with the RTC Planning. So I'm going to give a brief overview about how the model works and how the trip plans are calculated for the RRIF analysis. So this is our model area. So the model area is divided into these smaller areas called the transportation analysis zones. So I'm gonna pull out the model so it's easier to see. This is the model, and so these is blue polygons. These are transportation analysis zones, the TAZs. And then if I click on one of them, the TAZs contain land use, social and economic data. For example, the number of households by different model years, income levels, population by different age groups, students, and the number of employments in different model years and by different categories. And based on this data, the model generates the number of trips from one zone to the other. And the product is a table called the trip table, and it has all the number of trips from one zone to the other for all the pairs of zones. So we also lay on top the model roadway network. As you can see, these red color lines. And then if I click on them, these road segments have the information about the roadway attributes. If this link existed in the different model years, number of lanes, posted speed, and the road classifications, and all the other attributes. So the model generates trips for each zone through a point in the TAZ called the centroid. And these dotted lines are called the centroid connectors. And they load these trips onto the nearby roadway segments. And after the model runs, we get volumes on the roadway network and all the other results we can use for a different analysis. So in this case, for the trip analysis, we have two different service areas, the north service area and the south service area. And each TAZ is labeled with which service area it's in, and the calculations are done for south and north separately. So for example, in terms of the calculation, so we extracted the total distance, for example, from zone 1 to zone 2, and in this case is 20.6 miles. For the trips, for the RRIF calculation, we want to include only the regional road distance. So we excluded the local road and the freeway distance. And in this case, it is only the orange portions, which is not 8.8 miles. So we multiply the 8.8 miles to the total number of trips from zone 1 to zone 2, and we'll get the total VMT from zone 1 to zone 2. And then we do that, the same process to all the other zones to zone 2, we'll get the total VMT to zone 2. So we do the same calculation for all the zones in the south service area to get total VMT to the south. And then we divided the total number by the number of trips to the south zones to get the average trip length for the south service area. And then we do the same for the north service area to get the average trip length for the north. So these two numbers we're using in the RRIF calculations. As you can see that one of the important input for the model is the roadway network input. And right now we're in the process of updating our 2050 RTP. So we collected information on potential roadway improvements in the whole region. And we are in the process of prioritizing and evaluating these projects. And once we have finalized the list of projects, we will code these projects into the model roadway network, and it will be used as the basis of a lot of our analysis. And another important input is the TAZ input, is the number of households, population, and employment I showed earlier. And this data is from TMRPA, and Jeremy is gonna give a presentation on how the TAZ data is developed. And I'm gonna turn it over to Jeremy, and he's gonna give a presentation on that. Before that, are there any questions about how the model works and how the trip length is calculated? Okay.
Are there any questions for Schwinn from the committee?
Hi, Dale, this is Brian. I'd like to ask a question.
Okay.
So Schwinn, on the last, second to last, where you showed the projects, you showed the regional roads, you showed current projects and future projects. What is the time frame of those definitions with respect to proposed projects versus current projects?
The current projects are what we have in the 2040 RTP. So right now we're developing an update to the 2040 RTP, so the 2050. So these current projects are what are already in our 2040 RTP. And these proposed new projects are in addition to these 2040 projects and we got a lot of recommendations through the public, different agencies, and also through our newer corridor studies. So those projects were mapped on this map you can see, and those are shown as the proposed new projects. And the regional roads are just what we use to identify what are categorized as the regional roads. So that's what you can see in this map here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I've got one for you, Schwinn. Kind of looking at this map, how do the freeway projects play into this? You know, in the calculation, they're excluded. I'm just kind of curious why we're showing, you know, I-80 and Geiger grade and NDOT facilities.
Yeah, even though the freeway trips are excluded for the RRIF calculation, in the model network, we still include all the improvements on the freeways. So it represents what are in the model network.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, if not, I'm gonna stop sharing.
Yeah, so just for a point of order, Schwinn, we'll go ahead and we'll take action on this agenda item 5, and then we'll move back to agenda item 4. So this one was for possible action. So do we have a motion to receive this presentation regarding the RTP and the travel demand model?
I motion, Craig Knudsen.
Motion by Craig. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by John Erickson. All in favor? Please say
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. So we're going to jump back to agenda item number 4 with the TMRPA development model presentation, and then we'll turn it over to Jeremy now.
Thank you, Dale. Good morning, all. I'm Jeremy Smith. I'm the director of Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency, and I'm going to share the screen here and take you through a PowerPoint describing our land use model, what we've been working on. Is everyone seeing the slides?
Yep.
Okay, great. So we're calling it the TMRPA Land Use Model 2020, the year that shall not be named. Hopefully one day we'll get through this year. So the whole point of this is when I started back in 2011 with TMRPA, it really was to come in and try to put together a data approach to filling in those TAZs, those traffic analysis zones or transportation analysis zones, with all of the information that Schwinn just showed. How many households are there? What is that population breakdown? What's the household size distribution? Elementary students, high school students, college students, and then 6 job categories to fill that in as well. And so really the first step is to try to understand what's really on the ground. And so to do that, we do something we call development tracking, where we try to keep track of everything that's being built. We've been at some points in time since then pretty on it, doing it monthly. Other times it kind of degrades to quasi-monthly. But the idea is that we take versions of the vintages, if you will, of the Washoe County assessor parcel data, and we compare them to look for changes in the parcels so that we can understand units that have been final mapped, units that have gone from being a vacant lot to being built, you know, what's built there and all of that. And really that's in service of filling in the model, the base year, so that I can have the existing condition, in this case for the 2050 RTP, the year 2020, which we have delivered. So in so doing, we're also tracking the minutes of planning commission meetings at the local jurisdictions, finding out what kind of entitlements are improved, working with the jurisdictional staff to understand where we have planned unit developments, where tentative maps have been approved and the like, and then what those look like whenever possible. We actually have a land use fabric that which we attempt to build out the future. So our fabric ends up being a little bit different than the parcel data because we'll, whenever we have the information, build in the lot block plan that is proposed through a tentative or a PUD or whatever it happens to be. We also get business data points. Over the years, we've gotten it from a couple of vendors. It's actually pretty tough to get accurate business information, but this info group data is pretty good. It gives you a point, an industry classification code for the point, and the number of local employees. They actually get that information by calling. My dream is that we'll be able to merge this data one day with our business licensing sort of data that we collect as local government, so that we can get, stop paying for it hopefully one day, but that has not happened yet. So right now we get that third-party data, it's licensed to us, and we do a bunch of manipulations to make sure that it's as spatially accurate as we can get it. And then we bundle that up to represent the employment distribution in the region. So we create this land use fabric that really becomes the basis. And this is really actually where most of the time and work is spent. But we also have to consider the future. So looking at each vacant parcel, looking at those entitlements, we identify on any given parcel, is it already developed or not? If it's vacant, is it constrained in some way? If so, we want to take those constrained lands out of the development potential. And we're basically end up estimating the capacity of all of the different vacant lands throughout the region in terms of their ability to support residential or employment uses. It gets a little sticky sometimes in the mixed use areas where it can support both, either or neither. So anyway, that's kind of like the bulk of the work, is the development tracking. But we're really been spending tons of time since we got the regional plan adopted, getting that data back into shape, and it's looking really good. So now we're into the mode where we're actually going to try and project this stuff onto the landscape. In order to do that, we need some targets. And so every 2 years, since about 2014, I think we took it over, TMRPA has been performing what we call the consensus forecast, which is a look at the future in both population and employment growth for Washoe County. We use 4 sources. The primary goal is really the population forecast. So we use these 4 sources: Woods and Pool, that's a national forecasting house. So is IHS Markit. It used to be called Global Insight. They're another national forecasting house. And then we use Jeff Hardcastle's information, the state demographer, and Sean Stoddard, who's a stats guy over at Tumwa, also produces a population model. Those are 4 independent models that we average together to come up with the 20-year forecast for the consensus forecast. That's been the methodology for quite a while now. And here's what that looks like. So going from 2020 out to 2040, the red dashed line is the average. And you can see how the other 4 independent forecasts stack up. And I mean, the reason to do this is to remove the bias you might get from any single forecast. So if we went with the Woods and Pool line, we'd be shooting off into the stratosphere there. And if we just went with, some of the other lines, like the green line, even, maybe it would be flattening out more than we think. So this helps to kind of put us into maybe a reality zone. And so, and I'll show you the increments that this is, basically about 100,000 people, give or take. Likewise with jobs is a little stickier. There's several ways there's 2 main ways, rather, that jobs are reported. There's covered employment, which is a fraction of total employment. Total employment includes things like realtors, sole proprietors that don't pay into the whole employment insurance scenario. And so how we receive this data sometimes is different from Woods and Pool. And by the way, we only can have 2 sources for the future employment projection, the Woods and Pool and the Global Insight. The local sources don't really seem to provide that info. So we work on averaging the 2 national sources, but of course the Woods and Pool is a total employment measure, which is good because that's what we're looking for in terms of traffic generation. We want to look at total jobs, but the IHS Markit data is just the covered data, which is what you can get, for example, from Dieter, if you look at the current employment statistics, that kind of thing. So I've done several basically factoring analyses where we go back in time. We have these 2 federal agencies, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And BLS, the statistics one, they look at covered employment and represent those statistics, and BEA produces total employment numbers, but they're always a couple years behind current. So I go back to, like in this case, 2018, to understand that difference, about 34% difference between covered employment to total jobs. And so you can see the this gray line down here at the bottom, if I get my mouse to show, was the original IHS delivery. Factored it up based on that analysis with those two data sources by industry, and then averaged it to get this dashed line. But then we saw massive unemployment due to COVID this time around. And we don't think that this pandemic thing is probably going to affect the population growth side of things, because we're still seeing really, median home prices going up and quite a few requests for entitlements of land and building. But certainly the job thing has been affected. So suggested a 5% downgrade in the starting point for the employment forecast to give us this red line to reflect that change in the start condition based on the unemployment. And that's based on looking at current employment statistics from the MSA and looking at the drop from basically March to April, where we really had a huge unemployment issue. It's been coming back up, but it's still about 7.5% down where it was back in March. So that's the employment side. And what that translates into in raw numbers is this. So up top, we've got 2020 consensus forecast population for the county at 477,148. And that's building off of the state demographer's last certified estimate of 469. So an increment of around 7,000 or 8,000 people. At jobs, with the 5% sort of limiter on there, down to just under 300,000. And then you can see the forecast. So at 2040, the consensus forecast is looking at 569. We actually extrapolated some values out because this is the 2050 RTP. Woods and Pool actually went to 2050, but some of the other sources petered out before that. So we did a little extrapolation using a basically a regression line to push those out to get out to 2050 in some cases. And this is the number that produced. And then you can see the same with jobs, looking at adding over that time period around 100,000 jobs over the next, that'd be 30 years. And so that increment, that turns out to be at 2040, we're looking to add about 92,000 people from this 2020 number. That translates to about 37,000 dwelling units based on the census uses something called a person per household multiplier. And so it's an average for the county. It's at 2.5 right now. So it's basically, we divide new people by 2.5 to get to 36,895. In this case, not doing any vacancy because the RTC model relies on households for chip generation and not really total units. So in what we've produced for 2020, we've actually accounted for vacancy based on census tract data. And so we're just doing a straight unit conversion of people so that we don't introduce any other vacancy, so that the model is really running off households. Extrapolated out over the 30-year period. So for the RTP, adding a total of 50,488 dwelling units is the target right now. And again, looking at jobs, in the end, we're going to add on the order of 99,000 jobs. That's the plan anyway. So that gives us our targets of what we're shooting for, kind of in a linear temporal sense. But then the key is obviously getting it into those traffic analysis zones on the ground. And so over the years, we've worked to refine our approach to spatial modeling, or spatial allocation of the predicted growth. We have this rule-based allocation model, which we wrote starting, been tinkering with it since 2011. It's parcel-based. It really operates off that fabric I was talking about, where we include what we call bubble mapping, which is building in, say, like a tentative map that isn't final mapped or recorded with the recorder yet. So it's not in the assessor parcel data, but we build it in so that we have the best take on where, what's slated for an area, if possible. We create a suitability. I'll talk about that in a second. If you look at that picture on the right, all of those parcels have been scored based on a series of spatial relationships, things like a distance to sewer lines, distance to major roads, maybe school zones in some cases, whether or not they're in a tentative map, have they been final mapped. We have kind of a list of suitability features that we apply to basically score the parcels to allow us to select them kind of in an order. And the similar scenario happens with the employment. So we're looking for those targets, and we score things so we can figure out what to grab. What's great about the parcel modeling, the fabric basically, is that we can aggregate it to anything. So we've used this to aggregate future predictions into the traffic analysis zones, but also into sewer sheds or school enrollment zones, all that kind of thing. You can just kind of grab it and see see what that future could look like. And of course, we don't know the future. I'm going to be clear about that, but we know what's possible. And so that's really the key, is to try to make sure we're accurately representing what could happen on any piece of land, and then taking our best shot really at what's going to happen first or second, third, all that. So there's kind of a few ways we also look at what could happen on a given polygon or piece of land. First off, we take what's known as directed units. So this is in working directly with the jurisdictional staff that, quite frankly, have their finger on the pulse of development in their city more than we do. And so if there are units or projects that they know about, we want to take that information and factor it in with a high priority. So we call those directed units. Examples of that are, we've been working with City of Reno and the RTC on the downtown circulation study. We worked on a UNR study, and there were several projects indicated to us parcel by parcel with a number of units or jobs. And so we've built that in to this model. Again, ends up being around 9,000 of the units that we could potentially grow into are these directed units. Then we have mixed use attenuation. That's a kind of a new term, but it just means mixed use areas are troublesome. I mean, they're great in terms of being able to kind of have some flexibility, I think, for development, but it's tough to know what could happen on them, right? They could support an apartment complex. Maybe they could support something with shops on the bottom floor and a few units up top, or they could support a completely non-residential sort of development. So in this case, what we did is we looked at two factors that could affect that. Number one, we took every vacant mixed use parcel that we were tracking, and we looked around for the closest 10 other mixed use parcels that were built to understand what percentage of that, or how many units, right, were they realizing of their potential. So that was kind of step one of the attenuation. And then step two was to look at the closest 30 parcels to see if they even had residential on them or not. And so what that does is it takes something like a downtown parcel, which could have a theoretical maximum of 150 dwelling units per acre. By looking at the neighborhood and what's built around it, it gives you some basis for tamping that down, because you're never going to realize 150 dwelling units every time on every mixed use parcel. So it's some attempt to kind of spread that around a little bit based on a neighborhood analysis. And then we have atomic units, which are the units that I kind of was referencing, where either the unit is final mapped, so we can see that it's been recorded and there's going to be a single family residence there. And so rather than doing some math calculation, we just put a unit in there. Or we've bubble mapped it based on a lot block plan, and it's the same situation, just less official, but it's in our data. So anytime we can sort of atomize down to a single family unit that we're predicting into, we attempt to do that. But then sometimes we are left with these large blob parcels. Sometimes they might represent a whole 640 acre section, and maybe somebody has an entitlement on that, but it's not in any way subdivided. And so we have to make some assumptions happen there. Sometimes it's blobs within a development that have different densities. It might be 30 acres in size, you know, at DU 7.25 per acre. And then another village is, say, 4 dwelling units per acre. And so we take that all into account. But we have to obviously not max out the development potential in those areas, because nothing ever seems to build, especially with single family, to even its fully approved number. So there's an 80% efficiency built in right at the top to allow for some things like streets. We also look at phasing. We don't, you could have a big giant chunk of land, a big parcel that maybe it's, 400 acres and it's 3 units per acre. I mean, that's going to be, you couldn't turn all that on at once, right? That would be impossible. So we phase based on, again, we're always looking to the data to understand how these things work. So if it's, for example, Somerset has a certain unit realization absorption that they achieved over time as they built that out, we would go say, okay, that's cool. So can we apply that to Stonegate when we build that out? And we'll have some kind of, basis in reality of how many units can be built annually. So we phase it. And then something we've talked about in this venue before, and I think is a realistic consideration, is what I'm calling now the topographic limiter, which is, I just like to make up silly names for stuff. But basically it's, obviously the hillier, the slopier an area is, the less realization you're probably going to get because of all the considerations for grading. It's important, I think, for where I sit, to balance the potential liabilities of approvals. We work in a regulatory scene where if an entitlement goes through and it has 5,000 units entitled on it, we don't want to forget that that could happen just because it maybe not penciled from a topographic perspective. for the developer. However, we also don't want to overbuild an area that probably won't build out to 5,000. So I'm working on how to kind of build that in, but it's kind of like the mixed use attenuation. It's a way to sort of further limit what might be realized based straight on math. So that's how we approach kind of building out capacity right now. Our latest and greatest version that we're working with, I think after we attenuated the mixed use area, produces on the order of 92,000 potential units across Washoe County. And so usually in the past, we've predicted into jurisdictions based on a concept called jurisdictional splits that looked at the sort of historic share of growth across the county. But we have a new concept in the regional plan, and we've had some changes, and some of the things we used to rely on to do this work have gone away, namely the TOD corridors and regional centers. And so now we have a new framework, and it's the regional land designation framework that's in the 2019 regional plan, consisting of the MU core, the mixed use core, tier 1, 2, 3 lands, and the rural area. And if you're not familiar, I think I have a map ready. This is our map. Are you guys seeing the map? Okay, good. So the dark blue area is our mixed use core. This dark, next lighter shade of blue is tier 1 land. The even lighter yet blue is tier 2, and then the gray is what we call tier 3. And then this blue hatch, anything outside the TMSA, Truckee Meadows Services Area, is rural area. And so those all have different targets that we're targeting in this model based on what's been happening. So if you look at the total dwelling unit share across the entire Washoe County, and we take out tribal lands, we don't have any authority there. And also our planning authority ends at the Tahoe Basin because TRPA takes over there. So there's no incline village in these numbers. But this is looking at the percent share in those 5 different areas. And this, so total historic is this first column. But then we also want to look at unit growth over time because it's changing. I think what you can see is that in the recent history, the past 5 years, we've had a higher share of new units being built in the mixed use core. You can see a decline in the kind of more suburban tier 2 core. So we, in the early 2000s, we were building a ton of single family. After the recession, I think everyone knows there's been kind of a shift towards more multifamily. And so that's being reflected in the numbers as we look at that. And then we also have kind of a breakdown of what's possible, in the future based on all that work we've done with development tracking. Clearly the suburban tiers, tier 2 and 3, they kind of have the most potential, but that doesn't mean we necessarily want to turn all that on. Maybe we want to squeeze as much as we can out of the core. I mean, that's our development priority scheme in the regional plan, is to go from the center out. We want to prioritize investment in our core. So these are the targets that I came up with based on averaging all that, looking at about 30% of the growth being targeted for the mixed use core and tier 1 lands, and then the remaining 70% to be distributed out to the remainder. And so if you look at sort of what's been happening over 20 years, that's a shift towards denser development, more akin to what we've seen in the past 5 years. That's where we're at now. I'm sort of waiting for feedback. Once this runs, I'll actually overlay the jurisdictional boundaries on top of it and make sure that we're not out of whack in terms of, I did a similar analysis based on jurisdiction to make sure we're recognizing those trends as well. I would just say, one of the things I did notice in doing that is that if you look at the total share of all dwelling units that have been built, there's quite a bit in the county. But if you look at recent trends, the county's ability to build has been, or their building has been diminishing compared with Reno and Sparks. So we're trying to reflect that as well. All right, so the suitability analysis kind of helps control the timing of how we realize those targets, right? So again, we score all the parcels. If you really want to get down and dirty with the suitability approach, there's a link here. And if you go to our website, you can check out the TMRPA housing study. It goes into detail about how we approach that concept. We did some regression analysis and predictive kind of testing at that time. And we did pretty good at basically looking at what had built from 2000 to 2015. We made everything vacant, that had built in that period, and as well as all of our future potential. And then we built out the region based on our suitability analysis, and we got about 75% accuracy. So felt like we were on the right track, and that's the approach we're trying to take going forward on this land use modeling this time as well. With the employment side, it's really quite a bit tougher because it's just, unlike a residential development where the densities that are proposed and approved, there's quite a bit of variability in what could happen with employment. So what we usually do is end up taking our existing employment areas and kind of swelling them, growing the employment in them. And that kind of, it does to some degree reinforce the existing pattern. But we also look at this footprint of blue lands you can see over there on the map, that those are employment supporting parcels that are vacant, and they have zoning or master plan land uses that may or may not allow certain of the RTC job categories to happen on them. And so we take that into account. And similar to the mixed use study, we've looked around the neighborhood to see what kind of employment uses have been there, have built. And we use that to help guide the share on these predictive parcels of what jobs might be there. And then we do something like look at the total parcel size as an acreage, unconstrained parcel size rather. And then we'll look at something called a floor area ratio. So how much of that unconstrained parcel size is covered by a building like a warehouse or an office building. And depending on what employment use is chosen, once you get that FAR, you can get a square footage, and then you can start using square footage per employee to generate jobs, basically. So that's how we get at new jobs on vacant land. And so once we have all of that predicted, and obviously we want to make sure folks have a chance to take a look at it as well, but we take that and we conflate it, which is the fancy word for mashing them up. We take the stuff out of that parcel fabric and we aggregate it to these traffic analysis zones and get all that stuff squared away. And then basically it's an annual model, it's selecting parcels annually. So we aggregate these different time steps based on the requirements, in this case, of the regional transportation plan. So we've delivered the base year of 2020. So we have the current scenario locked in, and now we're working to deliver 2025, 2030, 2040, 2050. And then John Erickson, the full build out finally is going to happen. And we're poised to do that. So that's what we're working on to deliver to Schwinn, hopefully draft versions on Monday. And from there, we can have folks take a look and vet it. And if we see that we're missing out on something, get in there and make some changes to the final version. Last thing would be that consensus forecast. 2020 consensus forecast is still in the draft mode, but in October at our RPC meeting, we'll be taking that for final approval. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
This is Alex Velto. Dr. Smith, I have a question for you. The slide that projected a population increase and talked about the necessary dwelling units.
Sure.
The multiplier for that slide was 1 dwelling unit to 2.5 people. That number seems kind of high to me, given how demographics are changing. People are having children later. I guess, how did you reach that number? And is that number supposed to be constant going forward?
That number could change. It has been coming down. It used to be 2.57, and it is slightly different if you bundle it up by jurisdiction. But I, in this case, looked at the Census Bureau's reporting of that, and they've got our county at 2.5. So it's kind of what I went with this time. It could continue to diminish household size into the future. We've never applied a rate to that yet.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Do you think that's something that you will eventually do, is to apply like a predictable, I don't know, downgrading by year?
I mean, I guess we could take a look at that. If we looked back in time to see how it's performed over time. I mean, the past is not always, allegory for the future, but it's always where I start to see what's been happening, and it's hard to know exactly where that would go. But I do agree that there could be a trend towards potentially smaller family sizes. Depends on demographics too, because certain demographic groups have larger family sizes. So I'd be interested to think more about it, but I don't have a great answer of how to manipulate that right at this moment. So if you have thoughts, Alex, I'm all ears.
Sure. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Hey, Jeremy, Jim Rundle.
Hey, Jim.
thanks, Jeremy, for the presentation, going through all that. At one point, we talked about the teams getting together and working on the suitability factors that we would apply for the region.
Sure.
What's the sense on that, since like you just identified you'd get this data to RTC on Monday?
Well, next week I'm looking to get draft versions based on like I've been putting out a couple memos around the consensus forecast on this land use modeling. The next one is going to detail the suitability factors, and we're actually going to we have a portal set up that I haven't unveiled yet necessarily, but it's a place we could all go to check all the data out. There'll be a map viewer. You'll be able to dig in on the suitability. And so what I would like to do is give RTC something, because we're a little behind on delivering, honestly, that they can continue to work with in support of their RTP, but also at the same time continue the conversation around the modeling and suitability. And if we notice something that is very wrong, or we have a different direction we want to go, we can react pretty quickly to update the TAZ data and really help Schwinn and the RTC staff to evaluate if there's any material differences with what we delivered for the draft, for them to keep moving forward.
So you'd say that it's evolved from potentially getting everybody together to look at the equalizer on a stereo type of concept to regional has taken what they perceive to be the appropriate or their best guess, and the other team members would essentially be responsible for looking into the data you guys have proposed?
Well, I think it's somewhere in between that, but I think we're trying to push it along, but at the same time, bring everyone with and have that conversation. So I would anticipate we would have a Zoom meeting like this to go over everything with the interested parties, such as yourself and folks at Reno and folks from this group that want to participate too.
Yeah, Jeremy, I have full confidence in what you guys have proposed. I'd still like us to all the jurisdictions get together and review the data. I guess it's not data, review the factors that you guys proposed, or the weighting, I suppose, of what you proposed on those, or why you picked that weighting.
Yep, absolutely. That's definitely what I want to do as well. I want to keep everybody in the loop and make sure we're all weighing in on that. I just don't want to wait to get all that together. I want to be able to move forward and continue to. It's a lot of work to get that data into the traffic analysis zone format, and so basically, it's not going to hurt to keep moving on our side to compile these versions, right? But in the end, we definitely want to be sensitive to the fact that we all need to understand this and build consensus, right? It's called a consensus forecast. So I don't want to fly solo. So I'll organize that meeting really soon. As soon as probably next week, there'll be another memo, Jim, that'll come out that points to the portal. Folks will be able to dig into a map that'll show the different suitability factors, input data, the fabric, the whole thing.
Okay. And maybe we would, to manage that timeline, Jeremy, if you anticipate getting that out next week, maybe we should coordinate the meetings for getting together right away, so that then people would realize or understand they have to review that data that you send next week and be prepared for the meeting that's upcoming on a certain date.
Yep, that makes sense.
That's all I have. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jim.
Hey, Jeremy, this is John Erickson.
Hi, John.
How you doing?
Hanging in there, man.
Oh, good. Oh, not too bad. Hey, is there a little bit of time with respect to making sure that everybody gets on the same page with these suitability factors with regards to the consensus forecast, being that that's a draft? You're going to have to wait until that is finalized. Is that correct?
Well, the finalization of the consensus forecast has never included the spatial work. It has always been the temporal forecast. And so I one of the things that delayed it a bit was COVID, quite honestly, and trying to see how that was going to impact. We put this thing together back in early March, late February. I got the data, from these sources. And so usually I take it for adoption in September, but I opted to just wait, given we're still having the conversation and to see how things were going to play out. At first I thought we wouldn't really need to change the employment forecast, but it was such a massive unemployment, rush that I figured we had to. So even if we take the temporal forecast forward for October, that would not preclude us from continuing to work on those spatial allocation aspects.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Jeremy, this is Brian Stewart with RTC.
Hey, Brian.
How's it going today? Great presentation. It's educational. I really enjoyed it. Just a quick question. I know there's a lot of discussion here on the suitability factors. What about the base layers? Where's that information coming that goes, and is that, I guess where's that information coming as far respect to the roads and the sewer lines and all the stuff that might go into the suitability factors?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, whenever possible, we're trying to use the official stuff. So the roads come from the OpenGIS data, the road layer from the county's GIS department will typically limit to major roads. They have kind of a functional classification on the roadways. So we'll limit those to do our distance calcs. The sewer data comes from the public works entities at the jurisdictions. We work with the school district. We work with the jurisdiction to understand the entitlements. So the PUDs and tentative maps, we actually track that. So we build that in. I think that the base data for everything that sometimes can lead to a suitability situation, or just, the capacity itself is the Washoe County Assessor parcel database and all of that. And then all of the work we do at Team RPA. So, I mean, whenever possible, we're using whatever the kind of official data is to represent something that would feed in. One thing recently that I've been trying to push for is an updated official slope layer that, in the past, back in 2006, we got some really good contours, 2-foot contours. We've been using those since then, but, with grading and potential other changes, and there's been some probably modification to that. There's LiDAR that's been flown, but my last conversation, there's still no official new slope thing. So things like that, we're trying to always stay on the cutting edge of sort of what's available to represent the data.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions for Jeremy? Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and seek a motion to receive this report for approval. Do we have a motion?
Commissioner Chesney, I move to accept this report.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Alex
with
Helton,
the
second.
Second, terrific. All in favor, please say aye.
Point of order. Point of order. Can we do discussion on the motion? Jim
Yeah,
Rundle.
please.
I'm just wondering. I'm totally accepting of the presentation, but what does the motion actually do?
At this time, Jim, all we're seeking is just to receive the report. We can, if the committee would like, we could ask Jeremy with some follow-up, and maybe that's something we discuss and bring forward at our next TAC meeting as well.
Okay, that because just with the points that we talked, that I discussed, I would like to see that go out to the jurisdictions, as Jeremy indicated that he would do. And I guess if that was part of our direction, I just didn't know what a motion actually was doing by accepting it. Are we accepting then all of the numbers as proposed? Are we reducing our ability to amend suitability factors and maybe change some of those numbers? I guess that's my concern.
Yeah, so the motion is really just to receive the presentation. But if there's other things you'd like to see, I think you can include that as part of the motion, Jim, if you'd like to amend it.
I would, well, I would ask that the motion the motion's on the floor and there's been a second, but I would ask that the motion include potential direction that Jeremy already accepted to, that we would, that the locals would get together and review the suitability factors and then endorse that over to RTC RRIF.
I'll withdraw my second if we want to do a different motion. That's
Yeah, I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay, so let's, Jim, you want to issue a new motion then, so we can be just concise?
Sure, I would move to accept the report with the, per the discussion that regional planning will forward the data to the local jurisdictions and coordinate a meeting to review the suitability factors and the data in the report.
Do we have a second?
second, Alex Velto.
Thank you, Alex. Any discussion? Okay, so all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, motion passes. So we're going to jump to now item number 6, public comment. Leanne, did we receive any additional public comment during the meeting?
No additional comments.
Okay. With no additional comment, we'll move to agenda item number 7, member items. Maybe first, let's talk about the next RRIF TAC meeting. Leanne, did you have anything maybe you'd like to propose?
Our next regularly scheduled meeting would be October 22nd at 8:30 at this time. I did want to also mention that typically, just because of our schedule of the fourth Thursday of the month, November and December are affected because of the holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas. So in the past, we've had a November, December combined meeting, usually around the first part of December. And so just something to consider going forward for our next couple meetings.
One other item from the RTC that we'd look for a future RRIF TAC meeting would be the indexing, the annual indexing of the RRIF report. So we anticipate that being presented at the October RRIF TAC meeting, as well as continue to go through some of the previous agenda items such as RRIF eligible improvements, as well as RRIF revenue related to changes to the 7th GAM edition. So that's what can be expected for future meetings on the RTC side. So I'll open it up. If there's any other member items at this time. Maybe we'll start with City of Sparks.
Dale, I don't have any.
City of Reno.
Nothing here.
Washoe County.
Nothing here.
Okay. Anybody else from the RTC?
No.
Great. Any other members that have anything they'd like to add? Great. So with that, I don't believe we need to do any motion to accept that item. So we'll move on to agenda item number 8 for adjournment. So we have a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Got a motion by Alex. Do we have a second?
Chesney, I'll second.
Chesney seconds. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Great. Motion passes. The meeting is adjourned. My time is at 9:33 a.m. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.